So I'm attorney Casey Walker. I'm the founder of VA Disability Group. My history, I was a former VA Disability Compensation Services adjudicator, otherwise known as a rater. Today we're going to talk about back compensation and pension examinations. Really what to do before you go to the exam and what to expect during the exam. So let's start with before the exam. One big mistake veterans make is they do not prepare with documentation before going into an exam. Specifically, you should be seeking treatment. You should be seeking treatment for nerve impairments down your sciatic nerve or femoral nerve. If you have nerve issues, you should be seeking treatments if you have limitation of motion, pain, or discomfort. Document it. Don't just walk in without anything that day and hope that the examiner trusts you on everything you say. In addition, you should be doing symptom logs. You can go to our website, they're found in the description below, and document your symptoms. It's like a daily journal or diary as to what you're experiencing with your back from a day-to-day basis. On top of that, do a sworn statement or a written statement and sign it and send it to the VA. Do all of this before you go to your exam. Because if you do it after, the examiner won't see it. The examiner is going to have access to the totality of your records. And if there's nothing in there, you better believe they're going to be less likely than likely to give you any type of favorable determination or statements. So once you've documented the proper evidence before you go into the exam, the next thing we're going to discuss is what to expect at the actual examination. So generally what the examiners are going to do is they're going to document your subjective complaints. They're essentially going to be scriveners. They're going to write down everything you say. It doesn't mean they're going to agree with you on it. But you might say, I have pain, I'm dying, my foot feels like it's falling off. Whatever it is you tell them, they should write that down in the subjective notes. And then they're going to do a physical examination. Generally, this ideally should include them actually physically touching you and doing a real examination. Unfortunately, a lot of these examiners don't do that, but we can't control that. In addition to their physical examination, they will also document any objective imaging, labs, EMG testing, anything that's objective. They'll also document that on this report. And then they will also look at treatments. So if you've been medicated, if you've sought any type of therapy, they're going to document that. And then lastly, they're going to give any type of functional impact that your condition might cause, to include whether it affects your employability. This is on every DBQ examination. One tip before we get into the details of this exam is when you go into the exam, don't embellish, but also don't be a tough guy. It's a day to just be honest. It's a day to let the examiner know and wince and ow, whoa, right there. Let them know when you're discomforted. But don't embellish, because they'll read right through it. You don't want that. And lastly, as we get into this, the goal is going to be to discuss the common conditions. For example, I'm not going to get into every condition under the sun. This examination discussion would last for hours if I did that. So I'm trying to cover the major medical conditions. If I don't include yours, I apologize for that, but we simply can't do it for efficiency's sake. So with the back, you're going to see a few common conditions. You're going to see back strains with a T, back sprains with a P. You're going to see degenerative disc disease, and you're going to see arthritis. Those are really the common ones that the VA is going to assess. If you fall outside the scope of that, you can look into the details of the links provided to determine what you need to know for your specific condition. How do these conditions get service connected? Well, generally it's going to be a direct service connection basis. You had to have some type of injury or event on active duty, and we're going to link today's diagnosis, if there's such a diagnosis, to that event on active duty. You can have secondary conditions with the back, but it's difficult. So let's say you had a major hip issue and that hip was causing you to alter your gait. Perhaps that altered gait causes a back strain. Another one is a chronic condition. There's a regulation, 38 CFR 3.309. And what that says is where a veteran is diagnosed with any form of arthritis within 1 year of separation from active duty to a compensable degree, which really means symptomatic, then the VA must also award service connection on it's kind of a presumptive chronic basis. So there's really two regulations that we're going to look at when assessing how to evaluate the back. And those are found in what's called the rating schedule. This is 38 CFR 4.71A. And that's going to be the rating criteria for the musculoskeletal system. We're also going to discuss 38 CFR 4.24, which is the nerves, because the back causes nerve issues. So we're going to look at two sets of regulations. Again, these are commonly known as the rating schedule. Within the rating schedule, you have diagnostic codes, and there's a different diagnostic code for different symptoms. The common diagnostic codes that we see are diagnostic code 5237, 5242, and those are the back conditions. And then for the nerves, we got diagnostic code 8520 and 8526. So let's look at diagnostic code 5237, which is a lumbosacral or cervical strain. Draw your attention to the rating criteria. All lumbar conditions are rated under 5235 through 5243. So essentially, all back conditions are going to be rated under what we're about to look at. And as you can see, the criteria here really focuses on flexion and extension and ranges of motion. When you get into the nerves, you're looking at diagnostic code 8520, which is going to be a form of paralysis, but it's incomplete paralysis. And this is really any type of nerve condition you have, it's actually a form of paralysis. And when you have incomplete paralysis of the sciatic nerve, it's usually some type of impingement. When the back's involved, there's some type of impingement on those nerves caused by the disc of the back. And as you can see, the VA breaks it up into 10, 20, 40, and 60% increments, and then it goes up to 80%. But usually you see a 10 or 20% with sciatic nerve impairment in the lumbar spine. One other thing I would like to bring your attention to is painful motion. 38 CFR 4.59. This is important. When you get into an examination, the regulation specifically articulates that painful motion must be compensated to the minimal compensable degree for that specific movement or bodily function. So when you go into an exam, if your range of motion is not limited, but you're having pain to any type of motion, they have to give you a 10%. And so keep that in mind when you go into these examinations. So there again, we looked at 38 CFR 4.71, 38 CFR 3.24, and 38 CFR 4.59, which covers painful motion. Now let's dig into this actual DBQ report. So as stated at the outset of this discussion, when you get into an examination, the examiner is going to actually write down all your subjective complaints. And you can see that in the evidence review and in the first few sections of this DBQ report. Then they get into the diagnosis. And what they're going to do is look at your historical diagnosis records, and they'll probably parrot that and write whatever you were previously diagnosed with, or they'll make their own assessment following the examination. It's important to note that you have to have some type of diagnosis in order to be compensated for anything. The VA doesn't compensate symptoms, they compensate the diagnosis. There are some minor exceptions to that, but that's the rule you want to operate on. Section 2A is really where they write down your medical history. But let's talk about the important part of this examination. Let's keep it simple, stupid here. They're looking at range of motion, they're looking at pain, and they're looking at functional impact when you're looking at the back. Flexion and extension are the primary things you need to focus on when you're looking at the back. So the examiner is going to go to section 3. This is a critical part of the examination report. And what that examiner is going to do is they're going to measure your ranges of motion for the lumbar spine. And they're going to have you bend in different directions. And those documented limitations of motion will dictate whether you're eligible for some type of compensation. But let's go down to the section where it documents pain. Specifically, it asks the examiner to document whether there is evidence of pain, yes or no. If they check yes, you're likely to get a compensable evaluation because pain alone under 38 CFR 4.59 compensates to the minimum compensable level for that specific joint. The back minimal compensable level is 10%. So if the examiner checks pain, you will get 10% for that. Now note, you cannot get a separate 10% for limitation of motion of that exact same motion. It's one or the other. So hedge your bet. If you're having pain, let the examiner know. Don't be a tough guy, and you'll likely get a decent evaluation as long as the other elements line up. So the next section the examiner is going to cover will be the sensory exam and whether you have radiculopathy. This is a nerve impairment that usually affects the femoral nerve or the sciatic nerve. Specifically, they're going to do what's called a modality test. So that's the straight leg test. And if the examiner does that and you do not communicate to the examiner that you're discomforted, then that would be an unfavorable straight leg test, and they would check a box that says you do not have a nerve impairment. So be prepared if they do a modality test, such as the straight leg test or something similar, that you need to communicate that you're discomforted if in fact you are. Once the examiner determines that you actually have a nerve impairment, they will select the box for radiculopathy in the affected nerve. Again, that'll be the femoral nerve or the sciatic nerve. The last part I want to cover is section 16, which covers functional impact. There's several landmark cases that are found in the description, and they have a little bit of overlap that cover functional impact. What's important about these three cases is that they focus on whether pain, weakness, or other types of functional impairment cause actual disability. And if in fact pain limits your range of motion more, you might be able to push through the pain, but it might really be difficult for you. That's a functional impact. And if that in fact is the case, then you might be eligible for more compensation. Some other unique considerations when looking at the examination report is that you'll notice muscle conditions are not documented on the joints. That's because muscle evaluations are separately compensated. So be advised that the VA only compensates muscle or joint conditions and not both. That's a strict regulation rule, so you really don't have much wiggle room there. And another takeaway from this is nerves, nerves, nerves. If you have any type of radiculopathy affecting your sciatic or femoral nerve, you have to let the examiner know, because the back in and of itself usually only compensates about 10% for pretty bad symptoms. But the nerves can be 10 or 20% per leg, and then you get the bonus benefit of the bilateral factor. One common trick that examiners would do during the examination is they might have you bend over to pick something up for them. They might drop their pencil, or they might drop something to see how easy it is for you to bend over. So if you walk in there telling them you can't bend, you can't get in out of your car, and they drop a pencil in front of you, and you bend over and pick it up without any issue, then your credibility is really into question. So be aware that those tricks do actually happen. I've heard quite a few reports from clients over the years about those types of tricks. In closing, the exam again is not a day to be a tough guy. The exam day is a day to be honest and to communicate any type of discomfort or limitation or range of motion you have. Keep it simple, stupid. Pain, limitation of motion, and nerve impairment. Paresthesia, any type of numbness, tingling, let them know. Document everything before you go into the exam. That examiner should already know everything he needs to know about you before they examine you. Symptom logs, sworn statements, and treatment should all be within the examiner's possession on the day of the exam. That's it for the BAC-DBQ examination discussion today. Check out our description for more helpful links and subscribe to our channel if you find it helpful. Have a good day.